Welcome to Inside Athletic Training, a podcast from the Professional Baseball Athletic Trainer Society and the ultimate destination for athletic training professionals, students, and educators looking to learn more about sports medicine and athletic training. In each episode, we'll dive headfirst into conversations with experts in the field, bringing you insights, stories, and cutting-edge information about athletic training and sports medicine. This week on Inside Athletic Training, we welcome in Scott Sheridan, the Director of Sports Medicine and Performance for Major League Baseball's Umpire Administration. Enjoy the show. All right, Scott, welcome to Inside Athletic Training. Very excited to have you on for today's episode. You're currently the Director of Sports Medicine and Performance for Umpire Administration at Major League Baseball, a position with a lot of responsibility, and we'll get into the details about that role here shortly. But to get started, like on every show, I'd love to share some background information with our listeners and kind of get some intel on what paths led you to where you are today. So let's take it back to the beginning. Let us know where you're from, were you into sports growing up, and kind of also how you found your passion for athletic training.
Yeah, first, Sam, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I grew up in Laurel, Delaware. People that don't probably know where Delaware is at, but that's actually called Slower Delaware because it's the southern part of Delaware. I grew up small school, only 109 my graduating class, so I played football, baseball, and basketball, but 5'6", left-handed kid. They put him on the mound to see if he can pitch, obviously. Other than that, I would say I'm athletic, but I don't know if I played sports great, but I had a good time at it. And really, honestly, growing up, I wasn't exposed to an athletic trainer at all in my schools. Was fortunate or unfortunate. A friend of mine had an injury, kind of ended up driving up to AI DuPont in Wilmington, Delaware, and this like sports medicine team sort of event happened, which sort of intrigued me and then drive me back home to Laurel, Delaware to try to figure out what athletic training was. So I didn't have a guidance counselor that knew what it was. And so I ended up trying to just kind of research on my own without Google. So it was a little bit of a challenge, honestly.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear how you get into it, all your colleagues across the league and how injuries for themselves or friends, like you mentioned, kind of spark that interest in learning what the profession is and ultimately a way to stay in sports like we all kind of wanted to do growing up. Well, Scott, I want to touch on your career in baseball. Prior to moving into your role at MLB, you spent 17 years with the Phillies organization. A big piece of that was as the Major League head athletic trainer, I believe, for about 13 years there in Philadelphia. Let's hear a bit about your early days in baseball and talk to us about the story of how you broke into the game after working at a clinic as an athletic trainer and physical therapist for so long.
Yeah, I mean, after graduating Westchester, I worked at an outpatient clinic for 11 years. So that was prior to starting with the Phillies. I spent most of that time as an athletic trainer. I spent, oddly enough, 3 years applying to get into physical therapy school before I got in. And then, Phil Donnelly, who was my mentor and boss at the time, created a relationship with the Phillies somehow. I think it was basically his clinic got bought out by a company called Physiotherapy Associates, and they had a relationship with baseball somehow. And then we started doing rehab for some of the Philly players in our clinic. Probably the breakthrough moment was, unfortunately, Mike Lieberthal, who was a catcher for the Phillies back in the day, got picked off first base, tore his ACL, and ended up in my hands as I did his rehab. And I think Jeff Cooper, who was the head athletic trainer at the time, kind of came into the clinic and got to know me a little bit. And I think I wrote really nice reports and progress reports for him on a regular basis that I think sort of maybe impressed him enough to offer me a job or give me at least an interview. He actually got me an interview with the Marlins first. I interviewed with them in 2001 and I didn't get the job as a rehab coordinator for them. And then the next year I interviewed with the Phillies and got a job as a rehabilitation coordinator. So, really, just built that relationship with Jeff and somehow he saw enough in me to think that maybe I would make a good rehab coordinator for the Phillies. So worked out pretty decently for me.
Mm-hmm. And you talked about Mike Lieberthal being in there and at a rehab clinic. Back then, was that pretty common? I'm not sure if people are doing that today with so many people on staff and rehab coordinators and specialists actually at the ballpark every day. Was it pretty common back then for a team to kind of send a guy out to a clinic to do his rehab?
Yeah, I think that was a little more common. Obviously, Jeff and Mark Anderson were the two athletic trainers for the club. They didn't have a physical therapist in house. They probably didn't have the time or the resources to really do the rehab the right way. Maybe certainly they had the knowledge, but just the timing of what they were trying to accomplish. Think about two athletic trainers and one strength coach, and look at some of our staffs now, how that's really evolved quite a bit. So yeah, I think that was pretty common. That if it was a long-term rehab, I think those kind of things probably got shipped out for the most part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting to hear with so many staffs getting so large across the league. It's kind of people coming up have no idea what what athletic training and PT looked like back in the day. Not that it was too long ago. But then moving on in your career, you broke in with the Phillies and spent 4 years as a rehab coordinator. Talk about that role. Kind of how it shaped you as an athletic trainer, changed perspectives working in pro sports, and what you learned from that 4 year stint there.
Yeah, I think the most important thing about that time was I had to learn the game. I had to be around the game, and what does it mean to throw on the side, or what's a bullpen, or what am I doing this day, or long
Mm-hmm.
toss, or just sort of like how baseball works. I think that was a big part of it, and I had to earn a ton of respect from the athletic trainers that were in the minor leagues that I came in. I mean, here I am. I'm coming from the outside. I'm now in charge of these minor league athletic trainers that are busting their rear to travel around the minor leagues and not the best situations and not necessarily the best pay. So I kind of had that weird, like I came into the game kind of at the top kind of thing, which was
Yeah.
a little bit unique. So I really had to earn their respect, and I had to have a mind shift towards treating like throwing injuries and that kind of stuff. I mean, I'd come out of the clinic where I was treating ACLs. I could have a total knee. I could have a total hip. I could have sprained ankle from soccer. I could have anything. And now I like to really focus my efforts towards throwing injuries, and the research behind it was important. So I had a lot to learn, quite honestly. And I was really fortunate to have some great athletic trainers in the minor leagues like Troy Hoffert and Brian Camerata that just like bought into it. Obviously, Sean Fakasny, who still works with me now with the Umpires, like these people really embraced me and helped me. And so I was really, really fortunate to have some accepting athletic trainers and staff, quite honestly. Like the administration with the Phillies was tremendous at that time. They really bought into what I was trying to do by coming in, and it didn't hurt to have Jeff Cooper's name behind me a little bit, because I think he had earned some respect in the game. So yeah, it was great.
Yeah. And you mentioned learning how baseball works. I think this is kind of a super underrated aspect of being an athletic trainer. You guys do so much more than just work on players. There's the mental aspect, sometimes acting as someone's therapist or psychologist or just a friend. But you kind of have that feel for what goes on in the training room, language used around baseball, how the sport works on the field, also in the front office, and just spending time with the guys. A lot of our listeners, for that matter, are students looking to break into baseball at some point, like you did. They know so much about the anatomy, so much about stuff you can learn in a textbook. Talk a little bit to those people about how important it is to learn, like you said, how baseball works and how to kind of navigate your way around the game and the athletic training room.
Yeah, I think, if you're a young student, you're thinking about like, hey, I want to work in baseball moving forward. I think the most important thing you could probably do, a couple things. Certainly, you should talk to the alumni that have been in the game and out of the game for sure. I think to have that historical perspective of where the game came medically and where it's at now medically is important. Obviously, talking to the current staffs in all of our clubs is going to be important also. But I think having a little bit of historical perspective is good. Look, the PBATS internship program is phenomenal. It's run well. It's a great opportunity to sort of show yourself off and, get yourself in the door and make a name for yourself and get where you want to be at the end of the day. But, and then the other thing is just be a good listener and understand the research that's out there and the value of peer reviewed research and what we do in our day-to-day basis. So, I think a lot of people come in with lots of great ideas and decide to just try to implement those things as opposed to really spending time just listening to the people that have been there before and understanding, like I said, the historical perspective of things. And I think that's probably an important message for all of them.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of more advice for those students, I know a lot of people spring training's coming up here. We're in early February when we're recording this. Maybe some athletic trainers across the league are kind of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and looking to make a mark at their first ever spring training, which is probably a very scary and exciting time for them. Any advice that you would provide? I know you started at a different level, like you mentioned, kind of higher up, but anything you would recommend that the younger athletic trainer who's just getting started, kind of how they approach spring training in their first season?
Well, be prepared not to get a lot of sleep. Try to take care of yourself in the process, which is somewhat challenging. But I mean, really, I think the biggest thing to spring training is just planning, like knowing the next day what you, for the most part, have. I mean, there's always going to be surprises in the day, but like really just being prepared for what's about to happen each day and knowing that, hey, I got these 5 athletes I know are going to come in and need this, and this, or whatever. And really just, again, I was always very lucky that the Phillies, we sat at the end of the night and really talked about everything we did that day and things we needed to do the next day. And I think that was a tremendous asset to our group. We really kind of were prepared for what was about to happen. At least 80% prepared. There was always, like I said, there's going to be some surprises, but it's a grind. Spring training is a grind. I sort of miss the camaraderie, but I don't necessarily miss the hours. So
Sure.
It's, but I think it's a great opportunity. It really is. And like I said, it's always fun. It's the last time you're really with everybody in your entire athletic training staff before you go your separate ways. And it's usually a pretty cool bonding time.
And speaking of bonding, you mentioned earlier a couple of people who kind of showed you the ropes and talked to you about how athletic training and really how baseball works. So some of that terminology like throwing on the side and whatnot. So you've worked with a ton of awesome athletic trainers throughout your career. But when you were coming up, was there anyone specifically who you really looked up to in the field and kind of acted as your key role model to show you the ropes?
I think there were several. Look, Phil Donnelly wasn't necessarily in baseball, certainly was a guru in throwing athletes and my mentor coming out of West West University. I had him as a teacher and a director, but, Jeff Cooper obviously hired me. He was my mentor as long as he was with the organization. But I had a lot of people, when you come into the room as a PTATC, it was kind of interesting. Like, I think there were people that were sort of a little bit skeptical of the PTATC or the physical therapist in the room when I got into baseball. Maybe that was my own perception, but I just kind of felt it. But there were people like Roger Kaplinger and George Poulos, Tom Probst, Lonnie Soloff, obviously Mark Latan, who's, kind of handed this job that I have now over to me. There were people that were always like just accepting of me. And I just felt like they were open to letting me call them and talk to them. And it could be something something really that I thought was important that they probably thought was stupid, but I really felt like they always came up to me. They always embraced me. They always really reached out and made sure that I was like sort of like comforted or I got my questions answered, So there's a ton of them. I probably left a million people out that always were there for me, but those are some people that come to mind when you think about that question.
And a ton of those guys, just legendary athletic trainers and PBATS members, from Roger Kaplinger, Tom Probst, George Poulos. A lot of those guys still doing it today. A couple retired, a couple moved on to different roles like yourself. But awesome to hear you mentioned, that old crew really getting started together. Moving on to a different topic here. You spent 13 years with the Phillies as their head athletic trainer. You accomplished a ton of awesome things during your time in Philadelphia. One I need to ask you about, obviously, is you were part of the 2008 World Series championship team. An awesome Phillies team. I think if anybody who watches Phillies baseball now, the atmosphere is just incredible. Can't imagine what it was like for you being in the dugout there. But when you look back on your time in Philadelphia and that 2008 championship team, what kind of made that year special outside of winning? And did you ever have kind of an idea that you guys were kind of destined for great things throughout the course of the season?
Yeah, I mean, look, I was fortunate. I started in 2007. The Phillies hadn't been to the playoffs in a really long time. We actually clinched on the last day of 2007 to make the playoffs. And so going into 2008, we knew we had a pretty good team. We had some pretty confident people, and Jimmy Rollins and Chase Utley. We just had a feeling. We had a great GM, Pat Gillick, obviously kind of leading the way. Pat was really just instrumental in building depth in our team. People talk about like injuries are always the key, but in 2008, we had some pretty significant injuries, honestly. And so, but what led us to where we ended up being was honestly the depth that was created, that we had protections for some of those things that happened in the season. So, 2008 was awesome. I mean, just a trip down Broad Street on a float and, a million fans in Philadelphia screaming,
Yeah.
hollering, climbing poles that were maybe not greased at the time, getting the ring. So, look, I was really fortunate to come into a situation at the right time, right place. But I think people often, they always talk about most successful teams just had a few injuries, but we actually had some injuries but it was just a really team effort that allowed us to get where we needed to be.
Yeah, and after your time with the Phillies, which obviously a ton of success there between you and Sean and everybody on staff, you moved into the role you're in now, which is the Director of Sports Medicine and Performance at Major League Baseball for the Umpires Administration. The job of a Major League athletic trainer, even an assistant or a minor league coordinator, might be more well known. Can you elaborate on your current role, how that came about, and also just kind of the day-to-day and tasks that you're responsible for?
Yeah, so the health of the umpire really was created. The program was created by Mark Laton 20 some years ago. So obviously there was an unfortunate event on the field for an umpire that kind of stimulated this whole process to happen. But my current role is basically we have 76 major league umpires, and my primary goal is set up physicals for them in January. This is usually where someone asks me if eye exams are part of them, because that's the typical joke I get about umpires. But I manage their day-to-day events. So we get a physical process done in January. That sort of sets us up for anything that may still be lingering. Obviously they're in 76 different places. So we're setting up with physical therapy or off-season care in all kinds of a variety of places that they live. And then I manage the day-to-day events of their injury. So, umpires, despite what people think, they don't just stand on the field. They do rotate and move to call plays. And they have injuries. The age range of this group is 35 to 68. So obviously we get a variety of injuries with this group, from typical muscle strains to degenerative hips and knees and back problems. Our number one event is mass shots every year. I think in 2023, we had about 150 mass shots. People don't realize that the umpire gets hit by that foul ball going back just as much as the catcher does. Right now we're in the process of really trying to shift to a wellness education and programming event for our umpires. I feel like umpiring, when I started, this is my 5th season, kind of like 2002 minor league baseball, where, the nutritional habits and things still really aren't being talked about as enough, and the wellness of the umpire and their sleep and their mental wellness. And we're starting to kind of bring all those things that we did for players when I first started into the umpire world a little bit more. And so, basically my busiest time is now, which was December and January leading up to our physicals, where we come out to Arizona and we create 76 individualized schedules for umpires to complete their physicals. And now it sort of tails off in the beginning of spring and games start, and, umpires create their schedules for spring training. My job is to take care of their health, but also try to begin to get them to understand the value of taking care of themselves a little bit better, if that's possible. So.
Yeah, super interesting. I think a lot of people forget about the umpires sometimes because, they're, like you said, there's so much complaining that goes on about calls, or we're just focused on the game, and there's less attention paid to them. Obviously, a huge part of the game are the umpires. So kind of to understand more about the day-to-day, and, if an umpire is injured or takes a mask shot and maybe there's a concussion or something, how does that process work in terms of getting care for them? Since, like you said, there are no athletic trainers on site in the dugout who are responsible technically for the umpires, but does that kind of fall on your, former colleagues across the league to get that care for the umpire if there is an injury?
It does. I am completely dependent on the home team of every stadium to take care of the umpires. So if there's a mass shot event happens in the game, home athletic trainer goes out, checks on the umpire. I try to designate one person of each staff to kind of be that person to reach out to me and contact me. Sometimes that's not always possible. I mean, they may not have been in the dugout when the event happened, but usually they are my go-to. And look, the athletic trainers of our major league clubs are phenomenal. I'm just impressed with, I know how busy they are, and I'm truly thankful that they do take such great care of the umpires on a day-to-day basis. Look, I lived it. I know it's an extra responsibility that you probably don't necessarily need, but they do embrace it. They're really good. The team positions are, at the home clubs are phenomenal. I think we had close to probably 10 events in Cleveland this year. For some reason, Cleveland was just a dark place for us. Mm-hmm. Jeff Desjardins and his medical staff off the charts, just knocked it out of the park with us and just took care of them. And their physicians called me on a regular basis. So yeah, we're completely dependent on the home team to take care of them and try to get them in the right direction. And then once they're out of that ballpark, then it's my job to sort of manage whether they go home or are they going to go to Philadelphia or Arizona to see one of our physicians. And then once we get that established, now we just got to create, my job is to create the plan of care, whether that's, in a facility at home, or like I said, maybe we send them to some of the PT and outpatient facilities we use across the country to manage their care. So, yeah.
Yeah, really an interesting aspect. I don't think a lot of athletic trainers across baseball and the younger levels really realize what goes into that. And obviously, umpire is such a huge aspect of the game. Shifting gears a bit, I know you've been in this role for a couple of years. Like we said a number of times, you had an awesome career in Philadelphia. When you look back and kind of reflect on your career compared to your current role, are there aspects of being with a club that you miss, having your hands on players, getting people back on the field after injuries, or just a camaraderie? Or are you in a position now where you're kind of enjoying the absence of spring training and all that travel that you did back in the day?
Yeah, I think, look, I miss the athletic training room atmosphere. There's nothing better, whether you got a little bit of music going on in the room and people coming in. It's kind of home base. Stuff happens in the training room that just doesn't happen anywhere else. Conversations that happen in the training room are always interesting. Probably miss a chance to win. It's nice every night to kind of go to the ballpark with an opportunity to win the game or win something, long-term or short-term. But now that I'm home, I enjoy working from home. I'm a 2-hour train ride into New York. If, one of my, bosses like Mike Hill or Matt McKendry asked me to come into the office for meetings, or I go there to see our umpires that work in replay. I get a chance to see my family more. I kind of get to create my own schedule as opposed to the Major League Baseball creating my schedule for me. Look, my schedule now is I try to see every umpire in season at some point in some venue, whether that's replay or in a stadium somewhere. And I kind of get to map that out ahead of time and know where I need to go. So I think the more I get removed from the game, the less I miss some of those things I used to like. Hands-on treatment's kind of nice, but I'm really fortunate of what I do right now and the opportunity I have to actually just spend some time with my family and see them more often. And my neighbors, actually get to know them. kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, no question. There's a much different aspect to the job you're doing now, but still equally as important to the game of baseball. Speaking of the game of baseball overall, I know you mentioned your goal in the future is to really take a bigger look at overall health and well-being for the umpires, which is super important. John Coyles and the people at Major League Baseball have also made a huge push toward the education and support of mental health for players and staff members. I know umpires are under a ton of scrutiny, more than they probably should be, with a lot of the automation and stuff that goes on and transparency, with the strike zone and all that crazy stuff. Can you share a little bit about the overall health and well-being and mental health of umpires and kind of how Major League Baseball goes about handling that?
Yeah, look, John Coyles and Lindsey Ingram have kind of been ahead of this and maybe just a step ahead on all of this and helping us kind of help maybe change the stigma a little bit, understand the value and the need to assist. We first always think about the players, but there's so many other people involved in the game, from the medical staff to just people working in the game. And obviously now for me to the umpires that have a lot of stress and need a lot of assistance in many aspects. And sometimes it's not always on the field stress. Like, you think about an umpire never has a home game. So, for me, when you're working with the Phillies, at least half your games are home. You might actually get to stop by home and see how things are. For these guys, they're never home. So unless they happen to actually play in the city they live in, some live in Phoenix, maybe they get to see their family. So I think there's a lot of stress on family life for the umpire. And obviously the stress on the field. I think the scrutiny they get through social media is just ridiculous. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I cringe at thinking that someone would put a square box in the training room for me and tell me I didn't tape an ankle exactly the way it was or something, like I just couldn't imagine being scrutinized that much by the public. So I really sympathize with them. I mean, look, I have a different appreciation for the umpires than I did when I was sitting in the dugout wondering, why they made the call they did or how could they miss that. I think it's just a really interesting job. And to just see some of the stories and some of the things that get put out there on social media about our group, really somewhat disturbing, I guess, in some regards, but I think that's also a good reason for, I'm hoping that maybe that's part of the reason that my PBATS group is so good at taking care of them, because they certainly do understand the stresses of it and the value of the umpires play in our game. And so, certainly crazy, but I think we've done a good job of creating resources. I mean, we got, like an Unmind application that they can go on and kind of helps them sort of chart where they're at. And then Sand Creek obviously is an employee assistance program that's available to them. And obviously we've created our own individual resources from the umpires, for mental wellness. So look, we sort of started this with the players, but certainly it has evolved to include everybody in the game right now, because I think we all face certain stresses no matter what job or role we're in. And we can always use a little bit of help, that's for sure. So,
yeah. And the men and women who make up the umpires across Major League Baseball, we've said this a number of times, but so important to the game, so valuable, often underrated, very much scrutinized. It takes a special person to be able to handle that scrutiny, criticism, sometimes pretty bad things being said across the internet, like you mentioned. These people very well, probably better than most. Talk about the characteristics of these individuals who are umpires and kind of what it takes in terms of strength and, mental fortitude to be in a position like that, which is so often scrutinized.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a group of people that certainly has to have a really thick skin to do what they do. And I think one of the biggest maybe misconceptions is that sometimes the people would think that they don't care, but I will tell you that, they don't want to get it wrong. They don't want to mess up the game. They want to get it right. They want to be good at their jobs. They work hard. I mean, there's a ton of training and resources that these umpires use. And, particularly now with all the video, I mean, we're always sending out, certain clips of a certain play to try to learn from something that happened in the game. And we have a group of supervisors that go around and they talk to these guys on a regular basis to try to get them through certain situations that may have happened in the game the night before. And there's just a lot of stuff behind the scenes on educating our umpires and understanding the rules. And, of course, then every year we make rule changes, right? So they have to continue to stay up to date. We just came out of Phoenix where, I did my physicals and then they spent 2 days, learning about the new rule changes and things that happened last year. And they talk about positioning and where they need to be on the field to make better calls. And so there's a lot of work that goes behind the scenes to get these guys prepared. And I think that's something that most people just don't understand. But at the end of the day, it's a great group of people and they really do want to do a great job on the field. I don't think anybody goes out there with the intent to mess up or, do anything wrong. And honestly, they really have embraced me. I mean, look, I'll be completely transparent. I'm coming from a position where, the Phillies and I departed and I got this new role and they've totally embraced what I try to do for them, which is just, it's just awesome. So like, that's my new family. They certainly understand the value I could bring to them and help them, I hope. But at the same time, it's a good group of people. They truly are, they're good for the game. And at the end of the day, they really are working behind the scenes more than people really know about.
Yeah, I think it's pretty funny how you mentioned, that the umpires want to get it right. And of course they do. And we all know that, or the majority of people, but still fans think an umpire is actually cheering for a certain team or, wanting to favor somebody. It's pretty crazy when you think about it, especially for you when you know these people and how great of, characteristics and people they are. And, just interesting to hear so many perspectives on the umpires, but you obviously know best there. One thing you did mention is the umpires embracing you. It's your new family since you're not with the club anymore. That said, your communication with the clubs is hugely important, as you mentioned. How beneficial has it been that you are, someone who recently has been in the dugout? You're, done so much for PBATs, so many of these athletic trainers so well. How important is that to kind of doing your job, getting it done successfully, and maintaining that great communication across the league?
Yeah, I think it's tremendously helpful to at least been there and done it already, right? Like I knew that if an umpire got injured in Philadelphia, that it was my responsibility. I'm very respectful of our athletic training staffs around the league. I hope they know that. I really reach out to each staff every year and try to get them to identify one person that's going to, take care of getting medical records to me on an umpire after an injury or communicating with me on what's happening. I try to give them as much notice as possible that something might be coming into town that needs a little attention and love. And I hope that they understand that, look, the biggest thing I can do for them at the end of the day is just say thanks because, probably just historically athletic trainers aren't always thanked enough for what we do. So
Sure.
I don't want to be that guy. And I think they know that I get up in front of that group at the winter meetings every year. I try to express thanks to them. I try to point out things that we're trying to work to be better at from, taking care of our umpires. So I think they know that I truly care about their jobs and I would never want to intentionally create extra work for them. So I think they understand that. And like I said, I truly do appreciate what they do for our group.
Mm-hmm. And shifting gears a bit, Scott, one thing I'm really interested to hear your take on, since you've had so many different experiences from working in a clinic to leading the Phillies staff to now working at Major League Baseball with umpires, is so you're dual credentialed as an athletic trainer and a physical therapist. Seems like that's the evolution of the profession in sports medicine. You know how big staff sizes have gotten across the league, sometimes 7, 8, 9 people on staff, where back in the day there maybe was a head and an assistant and a strength coach, like you mentioned earlier. Where do you see the profession of athletic training and sports medicine going now that there's so much innovation in technology, so much innovation in analytics, and just a need for more people on staff? What do you see kind of the near future for the profession looking like?
Yeah, I guess I still get to talk about the going uphill both ways in the snow story when you had 2 athletic trainers and 1 strength coach. But, look, athletic training is a unique profession that has a ton of dedicated and very passionate members. Having more people on staff, I hope, allows them to give the players the attention they need. I know I often struggled with trying to, create enough time to really get down and evaluate things better and treat things differently and spend more time with our athletes. That obviously, that's what our game is all about, is the players at the end of the day. I think the one thing I hope we will get out of this is by having more time and spending more time, maybe collecting data and researches that will become more collaborative as a profession. I think when everybody started into analytics, I think we got very protective of our data. And I hope we become more collaborative because honestly, we haven't really solved the injury riddle in baseball yet. If you look at IL numbers, and even though I take care of umpires now, I'm still very passionate about understanding throwing injuries and prevention. But we haven't particularly gotten collaborative enough. And now that I'm sort of a fly on the wall in training rooms and I'm not a competitor, I think it's nice to see how people go about their day-to-day basis with their players and try to learn maybe something from each of them. So I hope we become more collaborative. I really, look, I have 2 credentials. I'm very passionate that both of them are beneficial. Athletic trainers have a very unique background to take care of the day-to-day management of our sports teams. What I learned as an athletic trainer can never be replaced. And getting a physical therapy degree only enhanced my ability to do rehabilitation and, that perspective of things. But it also gave me, look, athletic training is about the kinds of people that we look at on a day-to-day basis as athletes, so to speak. That doesn't mean we couldn't treat other things. Physical therapy expanded that knowledge base. I had to treat, I was in outpatient orthopedics, but then I was in hospital-based. I was in neuro places. So, it gave me a broader definition of what rehabilitation is about. I'm passionate both. I think our the biggest problem we probably have is that we haven't found a way as athletic trainers and physical therapists to grow together and understand how we could help each other. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, I really hope these staffs can begin to poke away at the research and be more collaborative. Quite honestly, that would be my end goal if I were king for a day and to get what I wanted out of this.
Yeah, definitely still, a lot to be done in terms of injury prevention. And like you said, there's so much innovation and analytics that make research really a productive thing going forward. And hopefully, like you said, staff start to work together more and build on that. Well, Scott, I know fans across the game might not see how much goes on at Major League Baseball headquarters in New York to really make the game grow and improve the product for the fans. And that goes into, including the training and work you guys do with the umpires across the league. So with that in mind, I want to give you a couple minutes to kind of recognize some of your colleagues and staff members up there at Major League Baseball headquarters that help make your life a bit easier every day.
Yeah, well, I would probably have to start with Matt McKendry. Matt obviously and I talk on a day-to-day basis. Our number one role is to make sure there's 4 umpires on the field every night. Matt controls the schedules of the umpires and an endless task. I don't think Matt ever sleeps, quite honestly. But certainly, him and I communicate quite regularly on just making sure that, we have the right umpires in the right place and someone's injured. We try to get somebody, a call-up umpire in place there. Mike Hill is, my big boss. Mike and I have been working together since, Chris Young, who went on to be the GM for the Rangers and now won a World Series. But, Mike's my big boss, and Mike is very accepting of the goals and initiatives that we have, which is great. And then I kind of have this strange little relationship with John Quarles and Lindsey Ingram, just sort of like on the health and safety side, where I don't really work under John and Lindsey, but I work with them quite a bit. And they certainly do understand like the things that we're trying to accomplish, with the umpires and trying to move their healthcare in a little better direction each year. So yeah, I'm fortunate. Like I said, the people in New York, the Kevin Ma's of the world, like just a ton of people that I got to work with when I was with the Phillies, and now they've kind of like brought me into New York and accepted me for what I did. So I'd like to think I built some of those relationships over the years going into this role that, when John Quarles called and needed something, I hope I responded in the right way and got it done for him. Look, I have a great group of people I work with in New York. I have umpire supervisors that just came off the field that call me on a regular basis about someone that they've had a chance to meet with and give me information. Mike Everett, Jeff Kellogg both just came off the field. Jim Reynolds just came off the field as an umpire. They're all supervisors. They're great resources for me to understand like what umpiring is all about. Again, just like when I started as a rehab coordinator, I needed to learn the game. I need to learn about umpiring and what the day-to-day grind is about. And so they've been great to help me in that process too. So yeah, I'm lucky. And then Sean, obviously Sakazmi, he was with me with the Phillies all these years and then decided to jump ship and come help the umpires on the minor league side. So that's a whole nother, I think you did an interview with him some time ago, but yeah, he takes care of the minor league umpires same way I do the major league guys. So I'm really fortunate. I have a great group of people I work with on a day-to-day basis. So.
Yeah, so much goes into, making baseball go. Umpires, as we mentioned a couple times, huge piece of that. So a shout out to everybody there who make sure that umpires are on the field and ready to go and healthy. So that's a huge impact on the game. Well, Scott, I really appreciate your time. Sharing so much insight about something, a piece of the game that not many people know much about. But to wrap up today's episode, we're going to finish with a quick Q&A segment called Extra Bases. With that, I'm going to ask you 4 quick questions and kind of let you share some insight about your career, your favorite things about athletic training and baseball. So we'll kick it off at first base. You've been to so many athletic training rooms across the league with your awesome career with the Phillies. When you were on the road and outside of Philadelphia, did you have a favorite athletic training room that you love to work in?
Milwaukee. Yeah, I would say Milwaukee, mostly because it was just so close to the dugout that if you had an injury, you could get right in it. Like they designed it right. Hats off to whoever designed that. But just if you've ever taken an injury off the field, I can remember having 2 lower body injuries in Chicago before the renovations occurred, and to go up the steps, the ramp, the steps, with 2 lower extremity injuries was quite the task. So I think Milwaukee was probably one of my favorite places to work. I just kind of liked the closeness of the clubhouse, the training room, and the dugout. Made things a little easy to get things done. So yeah.
I think the most common theme among you and your colleagues across the league is proximity, being close to stuff, whether it's the training room, the weight room, or just the dugout. I think proximity is one of the favorite things you guys like about athletic training rooms. Moving on to second base, awesome vantage point for you to watch games from the dugout for so many years. When you were on the road, did you have a favorite big league stadium to watch a game from the dugout?
Yeah, I probably had two. If I had to guess, I mean, Pittsburgh's just the backdrop of the city is just awesome. And the fact that you can walk to the park from your hotel every night is great. I'd probably say the same for St. Louis. I mean, the arch in the background is pretty cool. San Diego is not too far away. I mean, that certainly kind of has a nice little backdrop. Plus, the weather is always great, unlike Pittsburgh and St. Louis. So, I would say, but Pittsburgh's backdrop is hard to beat. The bridges, just the background of the city is really unique. So, yeah, a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think that's a super common answer is Pittsburgh. I don't think you can beat the scenery that shows up behind the stadium out in center field. So great answer there. Moving on to third base. Much like watching games from the dugout, there's so many good options here. But when you're on the road, is there a certain city that you like to visit?
Chicago's number one. It's not even probably, maybe Denver, maybe San Diego are in there. The food options in Chicago were always my favorite. Being able to run on the lake to try to run that food off was kind of nice. Try to get rid of some of those calories after you ate so well in there. And Wrigley is not such a bad place to hang out either. So, I mean, Wrigley Field, certainly all the history there. I mean, a day game in Wrigley with just the environment and everything, hard to beat. So, yeah, I think the total package is probably Chicago for me.
Yeah, as a former Chicago resident myself, I don't think it's any question why so many of you guys love the lakefront on a nice summer morning before you head to the ballpark. It's truly unbeatable in my mind, but I'm a little biased there. Moving on, the last question for today, home plate. Kind of reflecting back on your early days with the Phillies as their head athletic trainer. Did you ever have a welcome to the big leagues moment during one of the first couple of years in the big leagues?
Yeah, I would think, first, standing on the line 2007 opening day and having, your name introduced is beyond belief. When you're looking around, you sort of need to pinch yourself a little bit. In that same vein, I also know that in one of my seasons early, I also got heckled by fans and booed, which is also not unusual for Philadelphia. So I don't even remember what I was getting booed for, but I just remember just keep your head down and don't look up as you're going back into the dugout after seeing somebody for an injury or something. So I will tell you some of my best moments. Unfortunately, you might have a pitcher get hit on the mound. And honestly, I had three guys in Chase Utley, Jimmy Rollins, and Ryan Howard that would walk in. And inevitably, Chase would say something way off the collar in the middle of this mound visit to check on someone's health that would just usually send me and the pitching coach into some kind of a try not to laugh event, basically. So, but yeah, I mean, look, being on the line and being introduced, being heckled is certainly unique. But I embraced every bit of that. I probably I have no regrets about any of those time I had in Philadelphia for sure. It was awesome. And, when you talk about stadiums to watch games in, it's kind of hard to beat Citizens Bank Park too. Like, I mean, you asked me favorite stadium on the road, but Citizens Bank Park does create a really unique environment that you probably don't appreciate when you see it 82 games a season as opposed to 3, so not a bad place to work if you have to work somewhere either. So,
yeah, I think it's unquestionably one of the coolest environments. I mean, even today, if anyone watching playoff games last year in Philadelphia, just crazy atmosphere, fans in Philly, obviously, very tough on the teams, but very supportive as well. I don't have to tell you about that. Well, Scott, I really appreciate your time today, your dedication to PBATS as always, dedication to the profession of athletic training, and your work at Major League Baseball is amazing. And we wish you and all your staff up in New York nothing but the best this upcoming season.
You got it, Sam. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Inside Athletic Training. We hope you've gained valuable insights, inspiration, and knowledge to fuel your athletic training journey. If you enjoyed today's show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on your favorite platform. And also, stay connected with us on pbats.com for more news about athletic training and sports medicine.